Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. Going back in an animated direction with this, because I do like to do animated films. So when you say the words Rankin Bass to people of a certain age, images will immediately be conjured up in our minds, right? You got the big-eyed Rudolph, who's all fuzzy with his shiny red nose. Hermie, the elf, who wants to become a dentist. Yukon Cornelius, like looking for silver and gold and licking his little pickaxe. The Bumble, the abominable snow monster. The Island of Misfit Toys, the Charlie in the Box, and Frosty the Snowman singing in the voice of Burl Ives. So what I'm saying is that Rankin Bass's stop motion animation specials, some of them were regular animation too, but most of the ones that we remember the most fondly are stop motion. They're pretty much like practically synonymous with Christmas for like large swaths of my generation, probably like the generation before and maybe slightly after. When I was a kid, it wasn't really Christmas until you at least had watched Rudolph and Frosty, which like I said wasn't stop motion but was regular animated. And it was also an added bonus if you happened to catch Rudolph's Shiny New Year, or Santa Claus is Coming to Town, or The Year Without a Santa Claus, which had the awesome Heat Miser. They didn't show those as much, so you were really lucky if you caught those, so, like right around the holiday season, and then that was just like a big fucking deal. You know, everybody's was like, oh, Heat Miser, you know what I mean? But there was one Rankin Bass special that I don't think I ever saw on TV, even though it would have been right in my fucking wheelhouse as a child. And that is their feature-length stop-motion opus, Mad Monster Party, which came out in 1967. Now, the weird thing about this is that you would think that this movie would be ripe for syndicated rotation, like right around Halloween. However, the thing was actually released to theaters, as far as I'm aware, by Embassy Pictures in March of 1967, because who knows? I don't know. Even though the story revolves around all the classic movie monsters, like from the golden era of Universal Monsters, and also features a voice performance by Boris Karloff in his actual final film association with the Frankenstein story that obviously had made him such a horror icon. Now, I guess maybe the reason that it didn't get as much later play, like on network TV, as much as sort of like the Christmas specials did, was because of its runtime. Like, it's 90 minutes long, so had they showed it on network TV, they probably would have had to extend that to 2 hours with commercials, because that's just how they rolled. Now, the film has become a cult classic nowadays, but not to the extent of the other ones, I feel like, and it still kind of flies way under the radar when people are discussing sort of like beloved holiday specials, particularly like Halloween specials. And that's kind of a real shame, because this one, I don't think it's quite as good as the Christmas ones, but it's actually like really a lot of fun. So like most, if not all of the Rankin Bass productions, I'm not really aware, the script and the character design are usually done in the United States, and then the actual very painstaking work of doing the stop motion frame by frame animation was done by MOM Productions in Tokyo, like in Japan. Now, the screenplay of Mad Monster Party is actually credited to the Mad Magazine creator, Harvey Kurtzman, and the movie as a whole does have a very Mad Magazine kind of like sensibility to it. Like, it has this sort of like groovy 1960s vibe, and much like Mad Magazine did, like references to kind of big cultural touchstones of that era, which may be somewhat lost on audiences nowadays, maybe, if you don't know a lot about what was going on in the culture at that time. The character design was also done by a guy that worked for Mad Magazine extensively, Jack Davis, who had a very distinctive style. He would do these caricatures that were like real big-headed and skinny-legged. So that's kind of what the puppets look like. You can tell that they used his drawings and then like rendered them in 3D form. So to give a little bit of context as to why Rankin Bass maybe chose this particular time period for this material, it's important to realize that the classic monsters from Universal's 1930s cycle obviously were enjoying kind of something of a resurgence in the 1960s, but they had been filtered through a more comedy-oriented lens. You know, you had the Addams Family and the Munsters were on TV. You even had like all the monster cereals like, you know, Count Chocula and Frankenberry and Boo Berry and Fruit Brute and all that kind of stuff. Now, I will say that by 1967, I think that trend was starting to wane a little bit, which is maybe another reason that Mad Monster Party didn't do as well, but it was still like pretty much in the zeitgeist at the time. Now, Mad Monster Party is definitely a dark comedy. It's a little bit of a dated one. Like I said, you can tell it's very 1960s, and it's also a musical because that's just what you did back then, I guess. I have to say though, like sadly, most of the music is just kind of there and just kind of seems shoehorned in. But I will note that the title track, which is just called Mad Monster Party and is sung by jazz vocalist Ethel Ennis, is out fucking standing. It has a real James Bond theme kind of air to it. And honestly, if you're into like goth or hipster kind of stuff or retro like lounge music or anything like that, you definitely need to add this shit to your Halloween playlist. It's a great, great fucking song. Like, go listen to it right now. So at the beginning of Mad Monster Party, we're introduced to Baron Boris von Frankenstein, which of course, like voiced naturally by man, myth, legend Boris Karloff, and the puppet was actually visually modeled after him as well, so it looks like a little puppety Boris Karloff, which is like super cute. Now, the Baron has just completed his greatest and most fiendish invention, which is a substance that's capable of disintegrating all matter that it comes in contact with. I mean, I guess like aside from the glass vial that it's kept in, apparently, because that always kind of happens in this kind of shit. You know what I mean? So now he actually demonstrates its effectiveness near the beginning of the movie by, looks like he wipes a little bit of it on a raven's foot and then releases the bird out the window. So the raven flies over to a tree like nearby, like out in the yard or whatever. And then the whole thing like explodes and disappears, which I was kind of like, not cool, blowing up ravens, puppet Boris. I mean, I know he's supposed to be evil, but still. I was like, even animal cruelty in like cartoon form is like disturbing. So Boris is like so jacked about this triumph that he immediately sends out invites to all the other monsters so he can show him his discovery. And also he's going to announce that he's going to be retiring as the head of the Worldwide Organization of Monsters, because apparently they have that. So he writes the invitations in like invisible ink or lemon juice or whatever. Because remember when you were a kid, you would write stuff in lemon juice and then you'd kind of heat up with a lighter on the back and it would like, ooh, it would turn brown. So he does that, and then like he attaches the little invitations to bats, or like little bats, put them in their claws, and the bats go out and deliver the messages. And they all go to all the other monsters. So you got Count Dracula, you got the Mummy, you got the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you got the Werewolf, you got the Invisible Man, you got Dr. Jekyll / Mr. Hyde, and the Creature, as in Creature from the Black Lagoon, but of course Universal owned the rights to that name, so I guess they kind of had to get vague with it, but it's clearly the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, notably absent, I will say, is the Phantom of the Opera, though I guess technically he's not really a monster, so I'll allow it. Now, already residing in the castle are Frankenstein's monster and the monster's mate. Again, Universal held the rights to the Bride of Frankenstein, so they couldn't call her that. Now, the monster's mate is actually modeled after and voiced by the iconic comedian Phyllis Diller. So it's essentially like a puppet Phyllis Diller is what it is. Like, they don't make it look like the Bride of Frankenstein, because I think that was copyrighted too, that look. She even, actually, the monster's mate even calls the Frankenstein's monster Fang on several occasions, which, if you're not old like me, was what she used to call her husband in her stand-up routine, like back in the day. Also, another person living in the castle is Boris's very hot, red-headed, and very stacked secretary, Francesca, who is voiced by Gail Garnett. Now, he built her and refers to her as his masterpiece. He also has kind of an Igor-like assistant named Yetch, who looks and talks like Peter Lorre, and like his head comes off because reasons. And also in the castle, there's like a whole gaggle of like zombie servants. Like, they have little bellboy outfits on. They actually kind of look more like old school ghoul type zombies, like with little green faces, and they have little gold nose rings or something for some reason. Because this was like, you know, you've got to remember, this was the year before like the Romero style zombies like kind of shambled onto the scene. So these kind of look more like old school, like little monster zombie ghoul type things. Oh, and there's also, I forgot, there's also a chef who's like pretty much a walking Italian stereotype. Like, he sings everything to the tune of O Sole Mio. And his name is, you're going to love this, his name is Mafia Machiavelli. He's only in one scene, but it's something. So all the male characters who talk, other than Boris, of course, are voiced by an impressionist named Alan Swift. And he does, some of the voices are just voices, but a lot of the voices are impressions of like other actors, which are kind of like little inside jokes. Like the Invisible Man sounds like, it's the same guy doing it, but he's doing an impression of Sidney Greenstreet, like the actor that was in Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon and stuff. And there's this minor character of like a boat captain, and he does that guy's voice as though he's being Charles Lawton, who was actually in Mutiny on the Bounty. Oh, he was also in Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he was also married to Elsa Lanchester, who played the original Bride of Frankenstein. So, see, there's like lots of little Easter eggs like that in here, so that's like part of the fun of watching it. So Francesca, the secretary, she is tasked with arranging the party, like, kind of once the guests arrive and everything. Now, she asks Boris, she's curious as to why this other monster, who's only called It for reasons which will become clearer later on, why he wasn't invited. Now, Boris says, oh, well, remember last time he was a crushing boar, quote unquote, at the last get together, i.e. he crushed several wild boars on the island with his bare hands. Hardy har. Yeah, so like I said, it's very Mad Magazine type. It's almost kind of like dad humor, but like, I don't know, like almost like kind of hippie pot smoking dad humor from the 1960s, if you catch my drift. It's and a little bit vaudevillian too. It's kind of like that, or like variety show type humor. So Francesca is, she also notices that Boris is inviting someone named Felix Flankin, who is a person that she is not familiar with. Now, the audience has actually already been introduced to Felix, who is also voiced by Alan Swift, only this time he's doing an impression of Jimmy Stewart. So Felix is this very young, very nebbishy pharmacist, and this was the 60s, so it's kind of like a pharmacist in the sense that he works at a pharmacy, and he's like a soda jerk, and he sweeps the floor and shit like that. He doesn't like dispense medicine. I guess he kind of does, but that's like not really his whole job. But anyway, so he's like a pharmacist, and he has very, very bad eyesight, like, Mr. Magoo like level. He's allergic to everything, and he has terrible eye-hand coordination. He's like tripping over everything, which I was like, okay, I feel you on that, bro, because I do that too. So Boris explains to Francesca that Felix is his nephew and is his only living relative, and that after he retires, he wants Felix to take over as the head of the Worldwide Organization of Monsters, which I'm just going to call WOM from now on. And he's like, and I'm going to pass on like all my secret experiments, and I want him to carry on my evil work, you know what I mean? So Francesca is not real happy about this development because she thinks that she should be Boris's successor. So she immediately starts thinking about how she's going to like eliminate the competition. You know what I mean? Now, meanwhile, all the monsters are on board this ship, which is heading for the Isle of Evil, which is literally what it's called. And although Felix is on the ship too, there are kind of like a bunch of funny happenstances and like misunderstandings, like his glasses falling off and stuff like that, that prevent him from realizing that he's traveling with a whole bunch of monsters. Like, he's really pretty much clueless, and he just thinks that he's going on a relaxing beach vacation, like at his uncle's Caribbean island resort, essentially. So one by one, the monsters either fly or swim or take lifeboats to the Isle of Evil. Because they're all aware, I guess they've done this before, that the ship captain actually won't dock at the Isle of Evil because he's scared of the place, because it's the Isle of Evil, duh. Felix, though, because this is his first time out, like, he's not aware of this. So he actually stays on the ship for longer, which results in all the monsters getting to the island, like, much earlier than Felix does. So, there's kind of, like, time for there to be set up and everything. So Boris kind of like welcomes all his monster associates, and they all sit down to dinner. And then Boris tells them all about his matter disintegrating serum, and they're all like, ooh, that sounds amazing, you know what I mean? And also tells them that he'll be stepping down as the leader of the WOM, and that later on he's going to be naming his successor. Now, he doesn't tell them who's going to be taking his place, however. So this kind of causes all the monsters to start scheming and like forming factions with one another to kind of ensure that they're going to be the ones that's going to get like all of Boris's evil promoting secrets, you know what I mean? So Francesca, in particular, she throws in her lot with Dracula, who, of course, is voiced by Alan Swift again, this time kind of doing a riff on Bela Lugosi a little bit. Oh, and fun fact, the look of Dracula from Mad Monster Party was a direct inspiration for Count Von Count from Sesame Street, like the monocle and the little triangular nose and all that stuff. That's from Sesame Street people. That's where they got the character design for their Count, is from this Dracula here. So Francesca is basically like, hey, I know who Boris is naming to succeed him. So if you and me work together, we can figure this shit out and we'll rule together and blah, blah, blah. But each of them, of course, is planning to double cross the other. I mean, they're evil, you know what I mean? They don't make these monsters out to be nice or anything like that. Not really, until the end. They are actually monsters and they are actually trying to promote evil, like I said. So they are planning to double cross one another. Also complicating matters is you also have the team of the Frankenstein's monster and the monster's mate, and they know that Dracula and Francesca have teamed up and are up to some shit, so they're always spying on them because they think they should run shit because they're like, well, look, who better than us, because the Baron created us, so we know all of his stuff and all that other kind of crap. So, and some of the other monsters kind of pair off or get into little factions and stuff like that too, and start kind of scheming to to be on top, I guess. So once Felix arrives, the little, kind of monster factions and all that kind of stuff, that all ramps up. Since they all see now that Felix is just this geeky little good-hearted person, and he's not really well suited for this whole evil gig, right? And Francesca at first, she even tries to get Dracula to kill him, but the vampire keeps fucking it up. You know what I mean? Just because of silly little things. And like I said, Felix remains pretty much oblivious the entire time, which is part of the humor, where it's Dracula's kind of swinging in trying to kill him, and he's like, oh, look at that shit down there. You know what I mean? Or, his glasses falling off, that kind of stuff. Now, somewhat ironically, Felix actually doesn't really seem to want to be his uncle's successor. I mean, he is unfailingly polite about it, but when Boris comes in and is like, oh, my boy, I want you to carry on my blah blah, he doesn't tell him it's oh, I want you to carry on the evil and and everything like that, but he does say, I want you to run the monster thing, and he's just like, well, look, man, I already have a job as a pharmacist, and thank you for the offer, but I'm gonna have to think about it, and it's I don't know if I'm really cut out for this. I don't know anything about your business or anything like that. So that's kind of the thing, is that everybody's trying to get his position, but he doesn't really seem to want it because, like I said, he's not really cut out for evil because he's just a nice little geeky guy. So during the middle of the movie, there's mostly just a bunch of musical numbers and kind of monster fisticuffs as various coalitions of monsters kind of jockey for position and try to take out Felix, and him not really realizing. As I mentioned, most of the songs are pretty repetitive and kind of bland, and seem to have been inserted in there mainly just to pad out the runtime. The one exception to that, other than the awesome theme song, which, like I said, is an amazing fucking song, is Francesca's big number, which was called Never Was a Love Like Mine, and that's sung by the same voice actress that does her voice, Gail Garnett. And it's loungy, and it's pretty rad. It's kind of the love theme type of thing, and it's that's a really cool song. But the other ones are just kind of meh, you know what I mean? So toward the end, Felix has finally, after all this time, twigged onto the danger that he's in and that everybody is essentially trying to kill him. But by this time, he and Francesca have fallen madly in love with one another. Because sure, why not? Now, in order to possibly save their skins, Francesca actually sends out a messenger bat to it, the previously uninvited guest monster. Now, when he arrives, he proves to be a giant ape, essentially King Kong, but just called it, obviously, to skirt copyright because, King Kong was a universal property. Now, just like in King Kong, the giant gorilla, actually develops feelings for the busty Francesca and starts kind of getting grabby with her. But Boris, in a final act of goodness, even though, like I said, he's pretty evil the whole time. I mean, he invented some shit to disintegrate matter. So, you know what I mean? He's an evil genius. But at the end, he decides, okay, well, I'm gonna, I'm gonna save, intervene and save my nephew and save Francesca. So it was kind of a final act of goodness. He allows himself to be taken by it/King Kong instead, and then he uses the matter disintegrating serum to, spoiler alert, blow up everything on the island, including himself, it, and all the other monsters. Everything that's on the island is just disintegrated. Now, I have to admit, I didn't expect such a dark, nihilistic ending, but I mean, I guess if you introduce something a fluid that destroys all matter at the beginning of the movie, you kind of have to use it at the end. You know what I mean? It's kind of like Chekhov's annihilation juice or something like that. So it just kind of had to go that way, I guess. Plus, I guess they were kind of trying to redeem the Boris character, because even though he was like the head of the evil organization, like he seemed like an okay dude. So they were trying to like give him a little bit of a redemption arc, because, you know, he sacrificed himself to save his nephew and blah, blah, blah. So Felix and Francesca escape in a little boat. But then, like, a very distraught Francesca tells Felix, well, she can't marry him because she's not human like he is. Like, you know, obviously Boris created her, and she's like essentially like a cyborg. She's like a robot. And he's basically like, whatevs. Like, he just kind of shrugs and says, oh, well, you know, no one's perfect. I think like the last scene was like a little bit of a riff on Some Like It Hot, you know, the 1959 movie. And then it's implied, I think, that he might be a robot too, because like he says like the last line and then he says it again and he sounds like kind of robotic. So I think they're implying that maybe Boris had also created him at some point and then like maybe sent him out into the world for whatever reason, and he was still like grew up like a regular. I don't know. I'm thinking about it too much, but that's kind of how I roll. So I have to say, like, the greatest strength, I think, of Mad Monster Party is in the art design. Like, the puppets and the sets all look fantastic. I especially like the look of the Invisible Man and the Mummy. I think those are my two favorite characters. And there's so much attention to detail in the background that it's really, like, entertaining enough just looking at everything and kind of marveling at all the work that was put into it. Most of the voice work is also stellar. Some of the jokes sort of fall flat. Like I said, it's very dated humor, a lot of it. And I kind of feel like a lot of the somewhat obscure film references might be lost on younger viewers or somebody that's not like, you know, a filmophile type of thing. And the songs, like, other than the couple that I mentioned, probably weren't really necessary. They don't really have much to do with what's going on in the plot, and they kind of go on a tad too long with very minimal, like, lyrical interest. I think there's one song in there that's done by a really cool-looking, like, skeleton band, who I think are maybe supposed to be the Rolling Stones, like, judging by the hair. I'm not really sure. But, I mean, the song is basically just called Do the Mummy, and that's pretty much all the words there. It's just, do the mummy. Do the mummy. You know what I mean? And like the mummy's dancing and it goes on like forever. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of situation. Now, the initial cut of the film, or at least so I read, was much shorter. I don't really know how much shorter it was. But the distributor, I guess they wanted to lengthen it because they wanted a theatrical release, so they encouraged the filmmakers to, you know, lengthen it to feature length. And apparently Rankin, in particular, was not happy with this. He thought the movie was a lot better, like at a shorter runtime, but he did do it because that was the distributor, blah, 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 and they had a deal. So I will say that the movie does drag in places, particularly in the middle, and there's like a lot of scenes in there that didn't need to be in there. There's a lot of filler, you know, not just the songs, but there's like some other filler, because like, so remember I mentioned like the Italian stereotype chef from earlier? Like there's a really long sequence where like Yetch comes in and is like asking him what he's making, and he's like singing O Sole Mio, like all this stuff, and he's showing him all the stuff that he's cooking and stuff, and it goes on. It's funny, but it goes on like a really long time. So there's like a lot of scenes like that. But to be honest, I mean, the characters are cute and the concept is really, really cool, so I didn't really mind it all that much. It's still like a good time. Now, I mean, I can see why this maybe didn't achieve the same exalted kind of cult status of Rankin Bass's like shorter, more Christmas themed like TV productions. It's still a hoot, like if you're real into Universal Monsters and you really want something that's kind of old school and sort of family friendly to watch over the Halloween season, or, you know, all year, if you're me. I would actually also recommend it if you're a fan of The Nightmare Before Christmas, the Tim Burton movie, because Tim Burton actually specifically named Mad Monster Party as a direct inspiration for the 1993 holiday classic. There was, incidentally, a sequel of sorts, kinda. I mean, I guess I don't think it could be a sequel because everybody died at the end of Mad Monster Party, except for Felix and Francesca. Like, all the monsters got killed. But there was kind of like a sequel or a related thing, and it was called Mad Monsters, and it came out in 1972. Now, it was just traditional cell animation. It wasn't stop motion, but the character designs were the same. Now, since Boris Karloff had sadly died in 1969, the voice of the Baron this time out, like in the sequel, was provided by Bob McFadden, who was another like impressionist and voice voice actor. And Alan Swift actually reprised most of his character roles from the first film and even added a few new ones. Now, I don't recall ever seeing it, but I think it's available to rent for like 99 cents on Amazon Prime, so maybe I'll give it a look like for a future video. So we'll see how that goes. So have you seen Mad Monster Party? Do you have any fond memories of it from childhood? Let me know in the comments. And that will do it for this installment at the salon, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.